The night had an eerie calmness, a stillness that felt unnatural. Outside, the breeze barely stirred, and within the walls of our quiet suburban home, the only sound was the steady, hypnotic ticking of the clock. I sat alone in the dimly lit living room, the flickering glow of the television casting restless shadows on the walls. The show playing on the screen didn't hold my attention. My eyes were fixed, but my mind was a million miles away, lost in a labyrinth of mistrust and doubt that had been tightening its grip on me for months. Tonight was the culmination of it all, the night I would confront the truth I had desperately hoped to be wrong about. For 10 years, I had been married to the woman I believed was my soulmate. Those years were a tapestry of memories, of highs and lows, woven together by what I thought was an unshakable trust. We had fallen in love quickly during college. She was everything I had ever dreamed of. Funny, intelligent, and kind. Together, we built a life that seemed destined to last forever. Yet, as I sat there alone, the weight of my suspicions bore down on me, forcing me to question whether forever had ever been more than an illusion. The changes were subtle at first, barely noticeable. She started going out more often, staying out later, always with a casual explanation. Work meetings, social gatherings, harmless outings with friends. I wanted to believe her, had faith in her. But then, little things began to gnaw at the edges of my peace. She began wearing a new perfume, one I'd never seen before. She grew protective of her phone, tilting the screen away from me, checking it constantly. The warmth that once defined our relationship faded. She grew distant, her affection replaced by a coldness I couldn't ignore. She was still there, physically present, but emotionally, she seemed to be slipping away. For months, I wrestled with my doubts, telling myself I was being paranoid. But deep down, a gnawing feeling of unease took root, refusing to let go. It was like living with a shadow, always lurking in the background, too elusive to confront directly. I tried to ignore it, clinging to the hope that my suspicions were baseless. Yet tonight everything felt different. When she told me she was going out for dinner with her coworkers, my stomach tightened, though I masked my discomfort. She had done this many times before, but tonight, there was something in her demeanor, a fleeting look in her eyes as she spoke, that sent a shiver through me. As soon as she left, the house felt oppressive in its silence. On an impulse I couldn't suppress, I reached for her phone, which she had accidentally left behind. My hands trembled as I unlocked it, silently begging the universe to prove me wrong. But the messages were there, stark and undeniable. Texts exchanged with a man named Jason, a name that meant nothing to me until that moment. Each word was a dagger, playful banter, whispered affections, plans for the evening. My world crumbled as I read on. This wasn't a fleeting mistake or a lapse in judgment. It was months of betrayal, hidden behind a facade of normalcy. The weight of it left me paralyzed. I wanted to scream, to hurl the phone across the room, but instead I sat frozen, crushed under the enormity of what I had uncovered. She was with him tonight. As I sat in that empty house, I couldn't stop picturing them together. Her smiling, laughing, holding his hand, kissing him as she once kissed me. My mind raced with questions. How had we come to this? Was she thinking of me, feeling any guilt? Or had I become nothing more than an afterthought to her? The hours dragged on painfully. Midnight passed and still she hadn't returned. The clock ticked away, each moment stretching into an eternity. I couldn't sit still, yet I felt powerless to act. Every sound outside made me jump, each one a false hope that she had finally come home. It was nearly 1 a.m. when I heard the familiar sound of her car pulling into the driveway. My heart pounded as her footsteps approached the porch, followed by the soft click of the front door opening. There, in the heavy silence, I waited in the shadows. The moment of truth had arrived, and I felt as though the weight of the world was pressing down on me. I had no idea what would happen next, but one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again. She walked into the house humming softly, a radiant happiness glowing from her like the warmth of a distant sun. Her smile was effortless, as if she had just returned from a perfect evening. I watched her from the shadows as she slipped off her coat and set her keys down on the counter. For a brief, sickening moment, I felt the weight of her joy like a physical blow. After everything she had done, how could she smile like that? How could she carry on as though nothing was wrong? When she turned and finally saw me sitting there, her smile faltered. Her eyes widened in surprise, and for a fleeting moment, fear flickered across her face. "Oh," she said, her voice trembling as though she was caught off guard. "You're still awake." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I held her gaze, letting the silence stretch between us. She shifted uneasily, her cheerful facade beginning to crack under the weight of my stare. "I was just out," she added hastily, her voice strained. "With a girl from work. You know, that thing I told you about." Her words hung in the air, brittle and insincere. I rose slowly, the weight of my emotions pressing down on me like a storm about to break. As I took a step closer, I saw her body stiffen. Her smile had vanished, replaced by a flicker of panic. Her eyes darted to the phone still in her hand. Without thinking, I reached out and yanked it from her grasp. She gasped, her hands shooting out in protest, but I held it tight. My voice, low and trembling with restrained fury, broke the silence. "I saw the messages," I said, each word deliberate and sharp. "I know." Her face drained of color. Her lips parted as though she wanted to speak, but no words came. She stumbled back a step, her eyes filling with terror. "I can explain," she finally managed, her voice a desperate plea. "Don't," I snapped, cutting her off. The anger boiling within me erupted in my voice. "I don't want your explanations. How could you possibly explain this? Months of lies. Months of sneaking around behind my back. Months of pretending everything was fine while you were with him." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over as she took another step back. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "This wasn't what I intended. It was a mistake." "A mistake?" I echoed, incredulous. My laugh was bitter, sharp enough to cut. "A mistake is one moment. One lapse in judgment. This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. A choice you made over and over again." I stared at her then. This woman I had once adored. The woman I had thought I would grow old with. The one I had trusted with every piece of my heart. She stood before me now, not as the person I had loved, but as a stranger who had torn my world apart. My voice dropped, barely above a whisper. "You ruined everything for him." Her body shook as she crumpled onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. Her hands covered her face as if trying to hide from the weight of her actions. "I'm sorry," she whispered again, but the words rang hollow in the emptiness that had settled between us. I couldn't bear to look at her anymore. Every fiber of my being ached with the pain of betrayal, the raw realization that the life we had built was nothing more than a fragile illusion. "I want you to leave," I said, my voice cold, each word cutting like ice. She looked up at me, her face crumpled in despair. "Please," she begged, her voice trembling. "Don't do this. I still love you." But I didn't hear her. I didn't believe her. Her love, if it had ever been real, had been destroyed by her choices. "I don't care," I said, the words steady and final. "You need to leave." I turned and walked away, her sobs echoing through the house like the ghost of something that once was. I climbed the stairs and entered the bedroom we had shared for years. Closing the door behind me, I collapsed onto the bed, my body heavy with exhaustion and grief. The silence of the room was deafening. This was where we had shared dreams, whispered secrets, and made promises that now felt meaningless. I stared at the ceiling, my thoughts a chaotic storm of heartbreak and anger. For so long my identity had been tied to our marriage, to the love I thought we shared. But now that love was shattered, exposed as a lie. The life I had built, the future I had envisioned, it was all gone. And as I lay there in the suffocating silence, I realized I wasn't just mourning the loss of her. I was mourning the loss of the person I had been, the person I could never be again.